I
Okay.
understand.
Steve, please, could you tell us your story, your cooperation with Vic Braden, Van der Meer, and Van Horn? Thanks.
Yeah, Welby Van Horn, Dennis Vandermeer, and Vic Braden. I was taught to teach tennis by all three of them. Vic Braden, um, I worked with Vic from 1979 to 2009 in different capacities. I think Vic, he's such a funny man. But I think many times people remember his presentation more so than his information. But Vic was a pioneer. He was a breakthrough guy as far as the myths in tennis were concerned, a myth buster. But I would say the word for Vic would be science. For Welby Van Horn, I would say the word would be balance. Welby, who was a world-class tennis player, before Pete Sampras won the U.S. Open in 1990, Welby had the record for being the youngest finalist. With Welby, he had a fantastic system for teaching beginners. He at one time in Puerto Rico, over a 10-year period, he produced more national champions than the state of Florida. So I would say balance and how to begin a beginning tennis player, start a beginning tennis player. Dennis Vandermeer, corrective measures, group dynamics, progressions. All three very strong backgrounds in tennis. So what I have done over time, certainly with other tennis teachers, but we consider those three to be our Christmas tree. There's a lot of other ornaments. We've continued to be lifelong learners and open to other contributions from other tennis educators. But yeah, those three really are the backbone, the cornerstone of the great base curriculum that we have.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So, why Vic Braden was so special?
Well, I think the time tennis boomed. James Van Allen invented the tiebreaker, and Vic right away, shortly was after that was put on. He was on TV. He was doing 1 minute tennis tips on television. So he entered Americans' living room. But Vic was a Pied Piper. He was great people skills, but very much a pioneer. And he studied the game with high speed film. So he 24 frames per second related to cameras. So Vic was really known as I said earlier, a myth buster. Um, I do think that he was really missed in many ways, even though he touched millions and millions of lives with what he brought to tennis. I don't think that many people really understood Vic Braden, the tennis teacher. I think they really understood Vic Braden more the personality. He was really a celebrity of tennis. Um, so fact-based instruction. You know, you want to know as much as you can from a scientific standpoint, and I think that's really in a nutshell why Vic was so special.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Steve, you trained Craig Tiley, who is head of Tennis Australia and the tournament director of Australian Open. What about?
Craig Tiley. Um, Craig Tiley is from South Africa, as you know. He went to the program that I designed. He showed up in 1985, and he was there for 7 years. When he entered the program, we went to the great lengths to get him a student visa, but he exited South Africa with a tourist visa. So he spent 7 years. It was a 2-year program, but he continued. He graduated from Stellenbosch, but then we went through our 2-year program. He had to actually take classes at a nearby University of Texas at Tyler. The 2-year program was Tyler Junior College. So he had to complete a 4-year degree, which didn't take too many hours because he already had a 4-year degree from Stellenbosch. Then Tiley, he completed a master's degree, but it was a long run. He was with us for 7 years, 10 Christmases. He was kind of stuck because of his visa. Our dean, Dean Lewis, um, Kenneth Lewis, he let Tiley get through because he didn't have the right paperwork when he entered the college. He needed to have an I-20, a student visa, but he had a tourist visa. So Yeah, I had a lot to do with him. I think with anybody who's that successful, you have to speak highly of his parents, the way he was brought up. Hard worker, charismatic. But yeah, he was with us for 7 years. Then he went to the University of Illinois. Someone else who was part of the program, actually, when Craig Tiley was a student, Jennifer Roberts, who's now married, her last name now is Morgan, but Jennifer Roberts was actually a teacher of Craig Tiley's. She was on our staff, and so he was very familiar with college tennis. When we were in Tyler, when he was in Tyler, two of the kids, Chad Clark, Julie Scott, they became holders of NCAA national championships. We actually had the players from the University of Illinois come and train with us, with the female players, and would come down to Tyler, Texas. Someone like Lindsay Nemo, who became an All-American British girl. So I would say he was very well prepared. And when he was at Illinois, besides bringing in the system that we assembled at Illinois, Tiley is, again, very charismatic. He did a great job recruiting. So he took a program at the University of Illinois over, I think, an 11-year period, maybe it was 12, but it was a long, long run where they went almost like, say, from worst to first. But yeah, no, it's interesting you asked about Craig Tiley, but he probably, from the Tyler Junior College program, is someone in tennis, deservingly so, who gets a lot of recognition for what he's done.
Okay, thanks. Steve, you watch tennis since a long time. How it has changed?
How has tennis changed? Well, I think a lot of people right away say the equipment. But if I were to say one thing, Pietro, the grip on the forehand.
Aha.
The grip
Western, semi-Western.
Years ago, 3 of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass. Players were playing with a wooden racket. Even Welby Van Horn, who was such an outstanding tennis teacher, I remember spending time with Welby in the nursing home when he was in his 90s. And he used to change players from what he called a beginner's grip to a championship grip. So he changed his players when they were, say, 15, 16 years old to a continental grip. And late in life, I mean, he was a great fan of Roger Federer. But if I had to say one thing, I mean, I think a lot of people talk about the racket, the technology, but the forehand, the grip on the forehand side. And I think you have to give Jimmy Arias a great deal of credit. Jimmy's father worked for Niagara Mohawk, and he taught it. Jimmy Arias was taught out of Ed Faulkner's book by his father. And Nick Bollettieri saw Jimmy Arias just hitting, and he said, that's how you hit a forehand. Years ago, people on the forehand side, I think people really tried to teach tennis where, okay, here's the ready position, here's the unit turn, backswing, contact, follow through. People really taught a 180-degree swing. And the tennis court's less than 20 degrees wide. But Jimmy Arias, I think because of Bollettieri creating the academy, obviously someone like Borg, when Bjorn Borg came on the scene, people thought his forehand was so unusual. But actually going back to Vic Braden, because this all ties together, back in 1977, Braden wrote a book, Tennis for the Future, and people thought Vic was very radical in his teaching because he was telling people to close the racket face and swing vertically. But if I had to say one thing, I mean, certainly the nutrition, the fitness has really changed with the modern game, but the forehand. Okay. Years ago, of course, the grass was not in the best shape, especially here in the U.S. And even at Wimbledon, you just think of someone like Rod Laver. The second week at Wimbledon, players would be wearing spikes. They didn't want the ball to bounce. If you were to watch, and obviously you can on YouTube, take Adriano Pennada. His grip, I would say that he had what people would call a composite grip. Years ago, it was called the Australian grip. It was in between a continental and eastern. But Pennada was so great, but he pinched his shoulder when he came up to hit. He wasn't so loose in the shoulder, and they didn't generate as much racket hit speed. But at the same time, the players from today could go back and look at Pennada And there's many things that players today cannot do very well. I mean, doubles is falling apart. You think about the Bryan brothers retiring.
Yeah.
It's amazing how people are playing doubles just so poorly, playing one up, one back. It's like Pietro, the Williams sisters are so great, but they're in doubles, for example, they're superior athletes that tactically play an inferior system, but they still win, and winning is confusing. But it's amazing to me to see doubles change for the worse, where people can't come to the net. If you're at the futures level, the professional players that are playing, you know, the lowest level of money tournaments, some players don't even warm up at the net. So the forehand's got much better, but the all-court tennis has got much worse.
Understand. Okay. You talk about grips. So I have a question lately, but I make earlier. What is an Hawaiian grip?
Hawaiian grip, that's a joke. Bud Collins used to call a young player who had beyond Western grip. You know, the racket has 8 panels, and people, for the most part, summarize and say, when you have your base knuckle on the 5th panel turning, going to the right, that's a Western grip. And Hawaii being further west than California, the Western grip originated in California. So it's kind of a joke. But it's a Bud Collins, the late commentator. He used to say the kid's grip it's not Western, it's Hawaiian. So that's the story behind that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you have already responded. In any case, what do you regret of old school tennis? What do you like of modern tennis?
With modern tennis, I think that players, the culture of tennis, it's too fast. They need to slow down. Young children should be taught better in the very beginning. And I do think that if you look at most young players today coming up, it's all about the serve and the forehand.
Yeah.
And they're not. Yeah, they're not complete players. In English, we used to say the player is the finished player. Now that means they're from Finland, a Scandinavian country. But I think that's one unfortunate, the fast food mentality, kids playing competitive tennis at an earlier age, not playing other sports. I do think that that's a shortcoming. I think that you can just see it where you go out and you play a tournament and almost everybody's playing the same way, and they have limited skills, basically trying to just have their forehand be their number one and only weapon.
Okay. Great base tennis, or what is it exactly? Also, the logo has any meaning?
The logo is in the shape of a tennis court. It represents building blocks. There's the three building blocks that are red, yellow, green. That represents the parts of the court, the zones of the court. And then the blue represents truth. So it's really, in the end, the approach, it's fact-based. To try to eliminate guesswork, try to have tennis have less opinion and more fact.
Okay, thanks. Ball machine, is it useful? If yes, why?
No, I think ball machines are very useful. I mean, if I had a preference, I would pick a backboard over a ball machine because you simply can hit more balls. I think one thing that happens with a ball machine is the players end up being too much in a static balance, a stationary position. I think you have to be clever with ball machines. I think it's much better to have 2 people go use a ball machine where one person picks balls up and the other person's hitting. Ball machines, the positive of the ball machine is when you're hitting, you can see where your shots are going. When you hit a backboard, the ball just comes to you. So I just think any which way that you can practice, the better. So yeah, I think ball machines definitely have a place. There's all sorts of ball machines. I mean, I think of the ball machines that just basically pitch a ball like a tennis parent's tossing the ball underhand. Ball machines are very sophisticated. There's one here in the States that hasn't really caught on. It's called Tennis Boomer. And a friend of mine, Dave Jordan, designed it, and it has a video camera, it has a computer, you can hit a series of shots, it prints out analytics. You can actually program it to beat world-class players. But it really hasn't taken off like it should have.
Okay, thanks. Has been written everything about tennis?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Has been written everything about tennis?
Has everything been written about tennis?
Yeah.
I'm always a little disappointed when I ask young players, do they have a library card? Check out a book for free, and do they read autobiographies? I think we're sitting in a library where there's hundreds of tennis books. I think there's certainly could be more about the character of a tennis player, the story behind a tennis player. I think that should be true. I think people make a mistake now with all the technology. You think of YouTube. I think if you're going to copy a Roger Federer or Rafa Nadal, the rock stars of tennis, stage development, it'd be really good for a 10-year-old to be copying a 10-year-old Roger Federer. I think young players, parents, and then actually coaches as well, they get in trouble by teaching the wrong things at the wrong time. I do think many things just fall into place. In other words, like a Pete Sampras, the way he used to raise his elbow on his forehand, that's something he added to his game. That's not how he was initially taught. So top players use a Welby Van Horn line. They can improvise with a fundamental range of correctness. As far as Braden's concerned, a top player, they can't violate physical laws. But when it really comes right down to it, I do think that's a problem.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Coach and parents relationship, your opinion, please.
Yeah, there's so many things. I feel like I could write a book about the do's and don'ts of parenting. Most tennis parents, they actually cancel each other out. A lot of times parents, opposites attract when they get married. One is tough and one is soft, but parents have to be on the same page. And when it really comes right down to it, many young players, as you know, they're born into tennis because their parents have a background in the game. If someone comes into the game and their parents are not former players, they're not tennis coaches, they can climb the ladder, but it really comes down to they just have to work harder. Usually they start later and they don't have built-in sparring partners. But when it comes down to it, parenting, especially here in the US, it's really changed. We always say there's 3 types of love. There's soft love, tough love, and crazy love. I think of Maria Sharapova and Yuri screaming at her. And Maria said, I figured out a long time ago, my parents were for me, not against me. But I think sometimes what happens is the young children, they sound out their parents. The parents, they don't necessarily have to be giving tennis advice, but just the advice to listen and learn and work hard. So no, I think that, tennis parenting has so much to do with a young player being successful.
Okay, thanks. Another question. To be a good coach, you had to be a professional player?
No, I was told when I got into tennis that if you want to teach and coach tennis, you have to become a good player. Now, I certainly enjoyed, for several years, I transferred athletic abilities from hockey to tennis. And I did the whole 9 yards where I lived in a van and traveled to tournaments. It's a bonus if you can play. I think that's one of the biggest problems. It's a myth. Just because you can play the game doesn't mean that you can teach the game. Our celebrity coaches, like say now Lendl, Chang, Edberg was coaching, Becker. they're mentors and they're confidants. You know, the tennis public should really know that, you know, like Lendl for a short period was working with Zverev, and I think Federer said it quite well. He goes, they said, well, what will Lendl do for Zverev? He goes, well, I don't really know. I don't know Lendl that well, but he goes, he's already number 3 in the world. So when it really comes right down to it, I think that that's way overrated. Here in the U.S., I mean, we have the largest economy in the world, and the tennis consumer, the parent, they don't have consumer knowledge. And many times the tennis teaching pro, they don't have product knowledge. And what happens is we have all these young players, for example, that the parents hire them because they're very good sparring partners. So just because someone can hit the ball doesn't mean that they can teach you how to hit the ball better. So it's a bonus. If someone plays professional tennis, it's a bonus. But all we have to do is stop and say, okay, let's have some of the TV commentators or professional players or the celebrity coaches. They would, for the most part, they would be so out of touch trying to teach a beginner, trying to teach basics, trying to teach mechanics. So, I mean, and then what people will forget that if you have a technical flaw, it doesn't matter whether you're a beginner or a pro, you still have a technical flaw. So again, I think it's a bonus to be a really good player, but it's unfortunate that many people below the professional level, especially, they get jobs, in very prestigious jobs, well-paying jobs, because they can hit the ball, not because they can teach people how to hit the ball.
Okay, thanks. What is a sound technique?
Sound technique, efficiency. Efficiency, we define efficiency as the economy of motion, least of moving parts, least amount of muscle recruitment. It's so important to use the body properly. For example, to set the swing by just making a unit turn. The better the player, the shorter the swing. You know, the swing should really be short and compact. When you watch most players, they just on the forehand side, it's a safe bet. The younger players coming up, that the racket is 4 feet behind their back. So if it's 4 feet behind their back, it's got to come 4 feet forward. That's 8 feet. And then it creates a centrifugal force that pulls the racket horizontally, almost in a full circle. And we tell people your swing's going like a merry-go-round, the ball is rotating like a frisbee. Your swing should be circular. It should be the shape of your swing matches the shape of the court. So we say Ferris wheel, swing like a Ferris wheel and make the ball go like a bicycle tire.
Okay, thanks again. Double versus single. Which differences in technique, footwork, strategy?
The difference between singles and doubles. It's unfortunate that the best tennis players in the world stopped playing doubles full time. You know, money came into tennis in 1968. You know, Jimmy Connors came on the scene. Stasi, he won Wimbledon. He won the U.S. Open. Bjorn Borg at the same time, same era. He could play doubles. Sweden won the Davis Cup when he played. He played with old Bingston. And with that, there was so much money in singles that the very top players stopped playing. Again, like the Bryan brothers, I said earlier, they're retired from professional tennis now. The big difference is you have to be able to go to the net. You got to serve and volley. And, you know, it comes down to, we have double specialists on the tour that, you know, they can play going forward, but some of the best singles players can't play doubles anymore. So the biggest thing, I mean, the serve is the serve, the volley is the volley, the return. Ball striking is very much the same, but where you position yourself and how you play tactically with your partner, big difference between singles and doubles.
I agree with you 100%. I like a double.
All right.
Could tennis be learned without explicit information, only by watching?
You know, I spent time with Peter Burwash, a Canadian. He certainly added a great deal to what we do. Peter probably has traveled more than anybody in the world. spent a lot of time with a young guy named Raven Klassen. He's up there for spending a lot of time in countries because he went to so many countries in Africa where he's from. But Peter used to say that the kids that teach kids who are not watching tennis on TV. It's really interesting. Sometimes there's too much exposure to keep it simple. So with that, you know, everything turns into a lesson. You know, it's very visual. You take someone like Monica Seles, who's very unorthodox. In her hometown, you couldn't play on a tennis court till you're 12. So she just hit against a wall. And, you know, she, again, very unorthodox player, but so good. So I would say with what we've assembled with a great base, one thing that would be a negative is it doesn't really allow for someone to become creative and have a very unorthodox stroke. But Dennis Van der Meer used to say, if someone just goes out and gets people to rally the ball back and forth, they're teaching tennis. You know, I think there's a side of over teaching and under teaching, but there's always the flip side. There's the science, but then there's the art. You want to get to the point where you can teach tennis without a lot of verbiage. I trained many people that taught tennis in countries where they could not speak the language. For example, Becker and Graf, when they came on the scene, and Germany being a wealthy country, there's so many of my former students, and some of them are still there all these years later. But we used to train people, okay, let's see if you can give lessons and you just use one word, 2 words, keep it very, very simple. You do want to get to the point where less is more with your explanations and demos and such.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Many champions trained by parents. Your opinion?
I touched upon that earlier. You know, Jimmy Connors, Kalamazoo is our national championship for boys 16s and boys 18s. And he wrote in his book that he never took a set from his mother until he was playing Kalamazoo. Now, I don't know. I'm going to guess that Connors was there a little bit early. Maybe he was last year 14s, playing first year 16s. But I think it really teaches perspective. You think of the Bryan brothers. They argue with their mother, like, you know, Kathy Blake. I think she's ranked number 11 in the United States. You know, did her 2 sons beat the mom when they were 13, 14? With Ivan Lendl, his mother was ranked number 2 in Czechoslovakia. So, so that's a bonus, but also too is that we've had students where their parents have really studied the content we put together, and you know, their kids have done very, very well, winning national championships and playing high-level college tennis. So I think the term for parents is that they really should be proactive. You know, sometimes you have to shove. How's it going? No, sometimes you need to push, but you don't need to shove. I think that the parents, you know, they can be a force, but at the same time, we all know the tragic stories where it didn't work out because the parents were too much. So you can definitely cross that line and be too intense and push your kids out of the game.
Okay. Seles, Bartoli, Santoro, Sie, all of them play both forehand and backhand double-handed. Your opinion, please. Pros and cons?
Yeah, with I think of Fru McMillan, the great doubles player, played with Bob Hewitt. He played two-handed at the net. He had a two-handed forehand volley, two-handed backhand volley. People forget Jimmy Connors had a two-handed backhand volley. With you know, I think Roger Federer started off, if you look at film, when he was really young, hitting two hands on both sides. Most young players hit two-handed. Rafael Nadal hit a two-handed forehand until he was almost 12. Kevin Curran hit a two-handed forehand when he was in the NCAA finals. And then he was hitting a one-handed forehand 6 years later when he was in the Wimbledon final. The ball doesn't know whether you're hitting, whether it's being hit with a one-handed or a two-hander. Most young players would be way, way better off if they started with a two-handed forehand. because when young kids start with a one-handed forehand, they can't support the weight of the racket, and there's a reason they use a Western grip. Also, the Western grip, it's a very good grip for a high bouncing ball. So all the little kids are very short, the ball bounces, it's way up high. Now, when you teach someone to hit two-handed, I coached a young girl who stayed with a two-handed forehand, Julie Scott. You know, she didn't really give it a pro tennis long enough. She tried a little bit, but she, her last 2 years at Stanford, she only lost 2 matches. She played a two-handed forehand with, but I think it should, the two-handed forehand should be taught where it's not unorthodox. You're not hitting crossover. You're not hitting with your hands crossed over. So if you're a right-handed player, you keep your right hand on the bottom for every shot, serve, overhead, two-handed backhand volley, one-handed backhand. The right hand's on the bottom if you're right-hander. But what you do is you switch your hands. When you hit it, developmentally, when you hit a two-handed forehand, ideally you'd be much better off to have the right hand on top. Sandy Mayer, Gene Mayer, their father, late Alex Mayer, he taught everybody to hit two-handed. You know, both his sons became top 10 in the world. And Sandy, he didn't hit two-handed. Gene hit two hands on both sides. It's really interesting. He went to Stanford, and Dick Gould told him, the ball's going to be faster. You won't have time to hit two hands on both sides. And what he did was he hit a two-handed forehand and a one-handed slice backhand. And Dick Gould thought that he would start hitting a one-handed forehand. When he came out of Stanford, he started using a Prince racket, and people thought it was because of the racket. But the reason he got to be number 6 in the world is that he went back to hitting two-handed. He was in college, and he went from hitting a two-handed backhand to just hitting one-handed slice. So no, I think that's a point that's really missed. Again, coming back to stage development, you know, I don't think many people are successful copying what they see Rafa do now. But if the parents, the pros, the teaching pros, and the players knew that Rafa Nadal hit a two-handed forehand when he was a young kid, maybe that would have some significance.
Okay. Watching tennis on TV, what is missing?
Well, in this country, and I've taught tennis in over 30 countries, but you know, and I'm overseas and in so many countries, I have a translator. So it's definitely different. I would say that the commentators in the U.S. are more entertainers. I love to listen to them. It's more small talk than fact finding. The American public, when they watch tennis on TV, they're not educated. You know, there's no former tennis teachers in the booth. There's no technicians in the booth. You know, that can vary from one place to the next. I do think that people need to understand that the TV is not three-dimensional, it's two-dimensional. The TV's small, even though we have these large screens now. The camera's shooting from up above. It's very distorted. So not only is it the angle of the camera high, and people, like, for example, people think the ball is going really low over the net. There's not enough slow motion shown either of what the players do. So I think watching tennis on TV, definitely in this country, but I would guess around the world, I think it's more for inspiration, but it's not for instruction. In other words, there's not that much learning going on when people are watching tennis on TV.
Okay, thanks. Steve, I stopped recording, but I am back in 20 seconds. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.